Hello, creative writing and service learning students. My name is Brandi Kalicki, and I'm going to be talking to you all about how tension can be created in your writing using setting. A little about me. I teach writing in Tallahassee, Florida. I've also taught in New York City as well. I have my MFA in fiction from Columbia University. I'm also currently working on a novel, so I really like to share ideas and tips with other writers such as you all. I'm going to start by briefly mentioning some elements of setting, then talk about why creating tension, especially in fiction, is effective, then get into the two stories, Love and Hydrogen and Purple Bamboo Park, a bit. Then I'm going to explain the exercise that you can do to practice this concept, which will be to write a scene with a contrast between the action or circumstances of the characters and the mood or atmosphere of the setting. I'm sure you've all heard of the term setting. A lot of different elements can make up the setting. I think most think of the location that a story or that a work of literature takes place in as the setting. This gives context to the character and the character's actions, rather. This is the world that the character inhabits. It can be a completely fictional place, or it can be a country, or one of the 50 states, something like that. The setting can also be more specific, such as inside a specific room in a house. It can be rural areas, in nature as well. Setting also deals with time, and this can be like a historical era, a time of year, a season. It can also be a significant time period for a character, something specific like an anniversary of something, like the anniversary of another character's death or something like that. I won't go too much more into about what setting is, but I think it's important to also mention that creating a mood and atmosphere are also major aspects of setting, and they also work toward the tone of a piece. There can also be an emotional landscape present that can add to the creation of tension as well. And I think that's particularly true of one of the two stories that you'll look at for this lesson. This is probably obvious, but why contrast can be so effective, because for the most part, literature is not a visual medium. Writers create images through language. So especially the shorter the piece, where you're trying to be as economical as possible, contrast is evocative. Contrast can increase tension in the narrative, and then the reader feels it. The tension is palpable in the two stories that you'll be looking at as well. So the first story is Love and Hydrogen by Shepard. This one immediately came to my mind because the setting is so unique. I think it's a pretty well-known story. I came across it first when I lived in Los Angeles, and then again in graduate school, and it's memorable. It's about two men who work as a part of the crew on the Hindenburg, the German airship. And the two men are lovers, and it actually takes place aboard the Hindenburg. So there's immediately, as the story begins, contrast going on in just the setting alone. At the beginning, the two characters who are in love, their names are Meinert and Noose, are helping to check the engines of the airship. And right away, there's contrast, just in the setting alone. As I said, the very beginning of the story describes the Hindenburg in flight. And I've always responded to the science-nature contrast. I'm always interested when that's part of the premise. But here there's a symbol of might floating in the delicate clouds. It's the contrast. And at the end of the second paragraph, it reads, they're at 2,000 feet. The clouds below stand by and dissipate. It's early in a mild May in 1937. Of course, that's when the Hindenburg disaster happened. But everything in that language is mild. It's almost as if there's a contrast. It's almost like a contrast that's sort of like a force, anti-force. Here's this mighty thing just floating. The force is what's going on inside the last part of this section that describes the other side of it, the sort of power of the Hindenburg. There's a description in the last part of the section on the second page of what's going on in the engines. And the lines there are, the sound is like God losing his temper, kettle drums in the sinuses, fists in the face. So that's a definite contrast to the mild language that's going on with the dissipation of the clouds in the sky. And that's all happening in the very beginning. So there's just, as I said, a contrast just in the setting itself alone and how the scene is set at the beginning of the story. But another contrast that can be used on a larger scale is the contrast between the action of the characters and the atmosphere of the setting. Of course, there are other contrasts, such as facing penalty. The two characters who were in love are both male, and they're facing penalty for homosexuality in pre-war Germany. And it's not in Germany, but they are German. And the contrast of the highs and lows that a love affair can bring is evident throughout. And the whole thing is a metaphor for the volatility of forbidden love affair, the explosion of an airship that uses highly explosive gases. So all of this creates tension that the reader can feel. It's a good example of use of tension through setting, or what's going on in the story and the action, and the what's going on in sort of the emotional landscape of the setting or the physical landscape of the setting. But there's the joyousness of love in a dangerous setting. That's what it is, really. Just as there can be beautiful occurrences during a setting showing the horrors of war, something like that, there are also tragic events that occur in peaceful pastoral settings or during joyous times. And that's the case with the second story that you are going to be looking at, called Purple Bamboo Park. So when you look at this story, the protagonist is a strong character, where I think the other story, the setting is much more prominent from the beginning. The setting is much more prominent. But with Purple Bamboo Park, rather, it seems much more like a character study. The settings are vivid, though. It takes place in Beijing, so that is an excellent setting, a large bustling metropolis where there are lots of very rich settings to mine and to use for a story. So there are various locales around Beijing, such as a busy street market and another park, not Purple Bamboo Park, but Rattan Park, and this park is described vividly as well. The protagonist, who is a Chinese maid for a family, she's called Ai in the story, that she doesn't have a specific name. The characters are not called, the story, the characters are not called by proper names. They're called husband, wife, baby, etc. Anyway, Rattan Park is lined with delicate shrugging willows and lusty ginkgo trees. So in every scene, it seems to be some mild kind of natural setting contrasted with the bustling of the city. So there's a contrast between the bustling and the delicacy of the ancient natural world. And you'll see this at the end when the climax action takes place, or the climactic action takes place. And but this particular story, to me, it shocked me a bit reading it, which is very effective. And I won't spoil it for you. I'll let you read it for yourselves. But basically, a tragic death occurs among the natural beauty of the final setting, which is the title of the story, Purple Bamboo Park. And there are images of this park through the last scenes, but some of them are the green lake, ancient looking pagoda, sun-faded paddle boats. There's lots of vivid descriptions of trees throughout, which is interesting as well. And I think that there's a lot of character stuff in the story, and a lot of symbolism going on in the story, but I'm going to stick to the setting piece of it because that's what we're talking about today. But it's ironic to me that a deadly accident occurs in a peaceful place of leisure. It's a bit uncomfortable, that contrast. And these characters aren't in a war-torn setting, they're enjoying themselves at a park. So that's the kind of contrast to think about when approaching the writing exercise for this lesson. You want to try to apply this idea. So to practice this idea, you want to write a scene, maybe even the beginning of something, so you can set the scene with a setting. Here, I'll read the instructions of this exercise. Write about an uplifting, hopeful moment of beauty that occurred within hardship or tragedy, or write about a particularly difficult, disturbing, or otherwise upsetting event that happened in a beautiful or somehow awe-inspiring place. So what I try to do when with the stories is pick one that kind of fit the first prompt and one that fit the second. So writing about an uplifting, hopeful moment of beauty, which is the love that occurred within the tragedy of the Hindenburg. And the second one there, I'm writing about a particularly difficult, disturbing, or otherwise upsetting event happening in a beautiful, awe-inspiring place, the tragedy that happens at the end of Purple Bamboo Park in the beautiful kind of natural setting there, the ancient setting that really is very evocative. Your narrator might pose as either a direct participant in or a witness to the event, but should remain active in the scene. Meaning, don't have the character just be observing what's going on, have them be the active participants. So something's either happening to them amongst the beauty or amongst the tragedy, like they're one of the characters receiving or doing the action. Try to select a specific location so you can describe it in full, very descriptive. Try to think of unique descriptions that can add, obviously, to the richness and to the contrast as well. Also, try to use a strong active use of setting the contrast with a dramatically rendered scene that takes place with at least two characters present and interacting. So you want there to be some sort of conflict or action between two characters, not just a character in nature or a character in a tragedy interacting with the surrounding or the environment or the atmosphere. You want that tension that's also created between two characters, at least two characters interacting. And you find that with both the stories. The first story, Love and Hydrogen, there's many people that are being talked about, many characters, two characters in particular that are the main characters that are the focus, and they're interacting. And then in Purple Bamboo Park, you have the main character, the protagonist, who is the maid, but she is also interacting with the husband of the family in a very specific way, and the wife of the family in a very specific way, and the baby. So that also adds to the tension going on. So there's tension in the action, but also tension between the action and the setting and the setting's own emotional landscape, natural and emotional landscape. I think I already read that. Use exposition and reflection only if necessary, but if you use it, try to remain exact rather than abstract. So especially with a short story, you don't want a lot of exposition anyway, or unless it's very deliberate for a reason, a lot of flashback, but so you might use dialogue. Just there's not a lot of setting up that needs to be, because you're trying to be economical. You don't have a lot of pages to work with such as in a longer piece. Describe with significant sensory details rather than generalize. That you should be doing anyway. That's kind of the show, don't tell, and try to resist stating what's been made obvious by the scene. So again, that's showing and not telling. You wouldn't show and then tell what you've just shown. So that's just kind of a reminder of that. So hopefully that's a bit of fun for you. Defer to your instructor on length of that, or the amount of time you should spend writing that. But you should practice this idea, and if you want to, play with it, do the best you can, and you'll submit it in whatever way your instructor would like you to. Okay, that concludes. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Best of luck to you all. Be safe and take care.